of 1956 in a brick office building in Columbus, Ohio, and a woman named Helen is sitting down at her desk. She is 24 years old, in her second year as secretary to the head of the underwriting department at a mid-sized Midwest insurance company. The office opens at 8:30. She arrived at 7:45 to start the coffee, sort the weekend's mail into 3 piles for her boss to see in the order he preferred, and unfurl the canvas cover from her royal typewriter. Her boss will walk through the outer office at exactly 8:25, set his hat on the rack, and go straight to his door. By 9, Helen will have taken 20 minutes of shorthand dictation, transcribed 3 letters from Friday, fielded 2 phone calls from his wife, and intercepted 1 salesman she sent away before he ever reached the boss's door. This is a countdown of 12 of the rules she lived under. Stay with me, because the rule at number 1 was the rule that explained why every other rule on this list mattered so much. For roughly 15 years after the Second World War, the American office secretary was the most visible female occupation in post-war corporate America. She sat at the center of corporate operations and was paid to be invisible doing it. The rules she lived under were partly written into her company's personnel manual and partly understood without ever being said out loud. The understood rules were the ones that decided whether she lasted at the job. Let's begin with the rule the company put in writing. Number 12, the typing test. In the spring of 1954, when Helen was 22, she sat down at a royal typewriter and was timed for 10 minutes. The test required 50 words per minute on the keys and 60 words per minute in Greg's shorthand. Errors counted against the speed. Helen passed at 53 and 62. The United States Civil Service Commission reported that in 1956, only 36% of applicants passed the federal typist examination in Washington. The secretary was a trained professional with a hard skill threshold, and the threshold rose with the job. An entry-level typist worked at 50 words per minute. A staff secretary worked at 60. An executive secretary worked at 70 or 80. The top tier worked at 100 and above. Number 11, the loyalty code. The secretary knew her boss's salary. She knew the dates of his doctor's appointments. She knew which clients he disliked and which he could not afford to lose. She knew which of his employees he was thinking about letting go before the employee knew. The loyalty code was not in a written contract. It was understood. The secretary repeated nothing she heard at her desk to anyone outside the door. The penalty for breaking the rule was immediate dismissal, no severance, no reference. The Columbia University sociologist C. Wright Mills, writing about the post-war white-collar workforce in 1951, observed that the secretary lived inside the boss's professional life more completely than his wife did. Number 10, the morning dictation. Each morning, the boss opened his door and called the secretary in. She came with a Greg steno pad with a vertical line ruled down the middle and a sharpened pencil. He dictated for 20 minutes. Her hand moved across the page in shorthand outlines that recorded his voice at 60 to 80 words per minute. By 4 in the afternoon, the letters he had dictated in the morning were on his desk, typed with 1 original and 2 carbons, ready for his signature. The dictaphone, which used a plastic belt that the secretary played back through a foot pedal, was spreading slowly across American offices, but executives resisted it because the machine could not catch the soft skills the secretary supplied: the prompting, the correcting, the filling in of thoughts. The historian David Morton documented this in 1999. The IBM Selectric typewriter would not be introduced until July of 1961. The desk a secretary worked at in 1956 was a manual desk. Number 9, the dress, inspected by the office manager. The skirt was knee-length and a neutral color, gray or navy or olive. Pants were not worn in the office, not by women, not in 1956. The blouse was a button-up with a collar, pressed at home on Sunday evenings. The stockings were mandatory. The shoes were low-heeled pumps, polished. A hat and gloves came to the office and were removed at the desk. The hair was off the collar by 9 in the morning. The lipstick was on. The first morning Helen arrived at the underwriting department in March of 1954, the office manager looked her over from the door of the outer office and said one sentence. She said, "Your hem is fine. Your stockings are fine. Your shoes need polish by tomorrow morning." Helen polished her shoes that night. The office manager walked the floor every morning at 9, and a stocking with a run was noted, and a comment heard once was a comment a secretary did not hear twice. Number 8. The steno pad and the pencil. The steno pad in a 1956 office was 6 inches wide and 9 inches tall, ruled with a vertical line down the middle of every page. The pencil was a number 2 sharpened to a fine point. The shorthand system was Gregg, developed by John Robert Gregg, and first published in 1888 as light line phonography. By the 1930s, Gregg had displaced the older Pitman system as the dominant American shorthand. Helen kept a cup of 6 sharpened pencils on the corner of her desk. She had been taught at the Catherine Gibbs School in Boston, the most prestigious secretarial school in the country, that the cup should hold 6 pencils, never 5 and never 7, and that they should be replaced every Friday afternoon. She did this every Friday for 31 years. The shorthand was not optional. The secretary who could not take dictation could not become a secretary. She remained in the typing pool. Number 7. The coffee, the errands, the wife on the phone. None of these tasks were in the formal job description. All of them were expected. The secretary made the morning coffee for her boss at 8:30. She picked up his dry cleaning on Wednesdays. She bought the Christmas gift for his wife each December and arranged it under his tree. She maintained his Christmas card list. When his wife called the office, the secretary knew within 2 seconds whether to put her through, tell her he was in a meeting, or take a message. C. Wright Mills called the secretary the office wife, but the phrase was not his. The novelist Faith Baldwin had used it in a serial in Cosmopolitan magazine in 1930, which was adapted into a Warner Brothers film that same year. By the time Helen sat down at her desk in 1956, the office wife had been a recognized American institution for 26 years. The unwritten rule was that the secretary handled the small things, so the boss could handle the large things, and the boundary between the two was a line only the secretary could see. Number 6. The desk by 5. The end-of-day discipline was absolute. By 5 o'clock, the desk had to be cleared of paper. The morning's mail had been sorted, answered, or filed. The afternoon's dictation had been typed and placed on the boss's desk for signature. The carbon copies had been routed to their destinations. The pencils were back in the cup. The typewriter was covered. The steno pad was in the top drawer. The chair was pushed in. If the desk was not clear, the secretary stayed until it was off the clock without overtime pay. One evening in October of 1955, Helen stayed at her desk until 6:45 to finish the carbon copy filing. She walked home in the dark. The next morning, when she arrived at 7:45, as she always did, no one mentioned the late evening. The rule was not that the secretary would be thanked for the extra hours. The rule was that the desk would be clear by 5. We are halfway down. The next rules go deeper. Number 5. The typing pool. 2 floors below the underwriting department in the same building, 40 women sat at 40 identical desks in 5 rows of 8, supervised by a head typist with a stopwatch.